Hello, this is Ben Television News Roundup, a compilation of major stories in the weekending. I'm Tunde Alabi. Thank you for being part of the program today. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has stated that the government Brexit white paper is still operational despite the amendments and disagreements in her cabinet over the proposal, which has led to a series of resignations. Meanwhile, the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has accused the government of failing to meet the need of the country due to distrust and chaos in Mrs. May's government.
People are losing trust in this government. The Transport Secretary, the International Trade Secretary, and now the Brexit Secretary were all members of the Vote Leave campaign committee. The Environment Secretary was the co-chair. They've been referred to the police by the Electoral Commission, having refused to cooperate with the Electoral Commission. Will the Prime Minister guarantee that her cabinet ministers will fully cooperate with the police investigation?
Prime Minister!
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, I actually question the way in which he put his question. Mr. Speaker, he has made an accusation in this House against members of this House.
Order. The question was heard, and the Prime Minister's answer must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman has made an accusation in this House against individual members of this House and of the government, and I suggest that when he stands up, he reflects on whether or not it was correct to do so. The Electoral Commission is an independent regulator, accountable to Parliament, not to the government. They have taken steps. They have, as we know, taken steps in relation to the Vote Leave campaign, and I would expect that all those involved and required to do so will give the evidence that is required and give and respond appropriately to any questions that are raised with them. But I say again to the right honourable gentleman, I think he should stand up, think very carefully about making accusations about individual members and withdraw.
Jeremy Corbyn! Order! Order! People can rant from a sedentary position for as long as they like. It won't change the way proceedings are conducted in this session. The Prime Minister's answers will be heard, and the questions from the right honourable gentleman will be heard. And no amount of orchestrated barracking will change that fact this day or any other. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stated the fact that the Electoral Commission has made that reference. That's what I said. I asked the Prime Minister for a guarantee that her ministers will cooperate with the police on any investigations they may make. That is not judgmental. That is a guarantee they will cooperate. These are serious issues. The current cabinet ministers were indeed central to the Vote Leave campaign. After 2 years of dither and delay, the government has sunk into a mire of chaos and division. The agreement that was supposed to unite the cabinet led to the cabinet falling apart within 48 hours. And on Monday, the government U-turned to make their own white paper proposals unlawful. Given that the proposals in the white paper are now obsolete, when will the new white paper be published?
Prime Minister!
Can I first of all say to the right honourable gentleman that what I heard from his first question was that he said that members of the government had failed to cooperate with the Electoral Commission investigation. And I say to him again, he should withdraw that. As I say, it's very important in this country that politicians don't interfere with police investigations, and the police are allowed to do their investigation as well. But everyone is innocent, and innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. And I say to the right honourable gentleman, I still contend he made accusations against individual members of this government that were unjustified, and he should withdraw them. He came on then to the question of the amendments that the government accepted in the Customs Bill on Monday night. Let me explain to the House what the position is. When we look at all...
Order. We're less than a third of the way through, possibly significantly less than a third of the way through, and people are becoming overexcited. They must calm themselves, and we must hear the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister.
Thank you. And the honourable lady sitting next to the Leader of the Opposition says this will be interesting. I'm going to go through each of the amendments in turn for the purposes of this House. Amendment 72 related to parliamentary scrutiny on plans under Clause 31 to form a customs union with the EU. We are going to leave the customs union with the EU, so we accepted that enhanced parliamentary scrutiny. Amendment 73 related to regulations on the application of VAT in certain circumstances. Such an arrangement is not part of the White Paper and the Chequers Agreement. We were able to accept that too. New Clause 37 was to prevent a customs border down the Irish Sea. That is government policy. And new Clause 36 related to reciprocity in accounting for tariffs collected, and that concept is in the White Paper. The Chequers Agreement, the White Paper are the basis for our negotiation with the European Union, and we've already started those negotiations.
Corbyn!
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's all very interesting, but could she explain why the Defence Minister had to rebel against the government in order to support the Cabinet's position of a few days before? This is a government in complete chaos. The centrepiece of the White Paper was something called, and I quote, the Facilitated Customs Arrangement. Having spent a week trying to convince their own MPs that this cobbled-together mishmash was worth defending, they abandoned it. So what is their plan now for customs?
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman is wrong. We have not abandoned the Facilitated Customs Agreement. We're discussing it with the European Union.
Jeremy Corbyn.
So is she seriously expecting that 27 member states of the EU are going to establish their own bureaucratic tariff collection infrastructure just to satisfy the war within the Conservative Party in Britain? On Monday evening, the new Brexit Secretary was starting the next round of Brexit negotiations. No wonder he didn't turn up. He doesn't know what he's supposed to be negotiating. 2 years on from the referendum, 16 months on from triggering Article 50, isn't the case that the government has no serious negotiating strategy whatsoever?
Prime Minister.
I say to the right honourable gentleman, he is just plain wrong on his interpretation of what is happening. I have a copy of the White Paper. I'm very happy to ensure that he gets a copy after this pre-MQs and is able perhaps to read it and understand what the government is doing and the basis beyond. But I say to the Leader of the Opposition, there are indeed differences between us on this issue. I will end free movement, he wants to keep it. I want us out of the customs union, he wants us in. I want us out of the single market, he wants us in. I want us to sign our own trade deals, he wants to hand them over to Brussels. I've ruled out a second referendum, he won't. There's no doubt which one of us is respecting the will of the British people and delivering on the vote, and it isn't him.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, we're 11 days on from the so-called Chequers Agreement, and the White Paper didn't even survive contact with the Cabinet or the Tory backbenches and hasn't yet even been discussed with the EU. Mr. Speaker, the Brexit White Paper does state, and I quote, the UK is committed to membership of the European Convention on Human Rights. Is the new Brexit Secretary signed up to that?
Prime Minister.
Right honourable gentleman, that we are signed up to that. That was in our manifesto. But can I also say to the right honourable gentleman, he has stood up and asked virtually the same question, and obviously hasn't listened to any of the answers that I've given him. The whole point of this is not that you just read out the question you thought of on Tuesday morning, but you actually listen to the answers that the Prime Minister gives. He said the Chequers Agreement stands, the White Paper stands. He said we had not even discussed it with the European Union. I think I've told him in at least 2, if not 3 answers, we are already discussing it with the European Union.
Jeremy Corbyn.
She obviously forgot, Mr. Speaker, the question I just asked her, which was, about the Brexit Secretary's support or otherwise for the European Convention on Human Rights, because he's on record of saying, I don't support the Human Rights Act and I don't believe in economic and social rights. He is obviously backsliding to keep his job, or that is the new policy of the government. With only 3 months to go until the final withdrawal agreement is due to be signed, the Brexit Secretary's resigned, the White Paper's in tatters, the new Brexit Secretary's skipping negotiations, 2 years of negotiations with themselves, and they wanted to shut down Parliament for 5 days. They've even given up on negotiating with each other. Isn't the case, Mr. Speaker, that the government is failing to negotiate Brexit, failing to meet the needs of this...
Order. No, I know what the attempt is, and it's not going to work. The right honourable gentleman will complete his question. He will not be shouted down, not today and not any day. Learn it. It's quite simple. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 2 years negotiating with themselves, they then wanted to shut down Parliament 5 days early. They've even given up on negotiating with each other. Isn't the case that the government is failing to negotiate Brexit, failing to meet the needs of the country because they are too busy, far too busy, fighting each other?
As the crisis over government Brexit white paper rages on, former Prime Minister Tony Blair has stated that a new referendum will be required to resolve the political logjam that has trailed Brexit.
British Prime Minister Theresa May narrowly survived the latest Brexit challenge on Tuesday when the Parliament voted against a proposal by pro-European Union members that would have significantly undermined her Brexit strategy. The pro-Union faction wanted Britain to join a European customs union if there is no trade agreement with the bloc by January. But that's not the end of May's troubles. The legitimacy of the Brexit vote is being questioned after the Election Commission said that the Brexit campaign broke electoral rules in the 2016 referendum.
Members of the Cabinet sat in an organisation which has been found to have flouted our democracy. Yeah. Does this not all demonstrate that we need a full, urgent public inquiry into the Leave campaign, given that it calls into question the legitimacy of the entire Brexit process, which is preoccupying this House?
May's predecessor, Tony Blair, who left office in 2007 after serving for a decade, said in an interview with AFP that there is no agreement in sight.
But I don't think there's a majority for a clean break Brexit, and I don't think there's a majority for any version of Brexit. So I think Parliament will be paralysed and gridlocked, and the only way in the end this is going to be resolved is putting it back to the people.
Blair said the Prime Minister has to acknowledge that her Conservative Party is hugely divided. But so is the opposition Labour Party. While most of its members are pro-European, the Labour Party's socialist leader Jeremy Corbyn has wavered on the issue. Blair said he is passionately opposed to Brexit and still hopes it can be reversed. But he said the European Union also is due for reforms.
It's got a huge problem in immigration. So, the issues that gave rise to Brexit in Britain are exactly the issues that are causing turmoil all over Europe. So Europe will be very sensible to take note of that.
May has rejected earlier calls for a repeat referendum, but as confusion about Brexit grows, so does a number of voices calling for a solution through a vote, either on Brexit or on a new government.
And following President Trump's harsh criticism of U.S. allies in Europe, including Britain, during his Russian visit, Republican senators have moved to reassure the U.S. allies of U.S. continued support for NATO.
Amid the fallout over President Trump's trip to Europe, he read a prepared statement Tuesday in an apparent attempt at damage control, saying he had great talks with NATO leaders.
The press covered it quite inaccurately. They said I insulted people. Well, if asking for people to pay up money that they are supposed to pay is insulting, maybe I did. But I can tell you, when I left, everybody was thrilled.
Earlier Tuesday, Trump also blamed the media in a tweet highlighting what he called an even better meeting with Putin. During his trip, the The president was asked by CBS, who is the greatest foe of the U.S.?
Well, I think we have a lot of foes. I think the European Union is a foe, what they do to us in trade.
But in Washington, it was left to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republican senators to reassure European allies.
For myself, let me just say to our European friends, we value the NATO treaty. It's been the most significant military alliance in world history. We believe the European Union countries are our friends, and the Russians are not.
Some analysts said U.S. allies in Europe are shaken by Trump's contrasting rhetoric towards NATO and Putin.
I fear they're going to take away the fact that the security guarantees of the United States are not as strong as they have been in the past. And this is not simply a reflection of today's event, but also the NATO summit and also the EU summit, where Trump has really criticized his allies. Again, allies of 70 years who have stood by the United States after 9/11 and after other major global crises.
But some disagree, saying that despite the terrible optics, U.S. support for NATO has not changed.
We see the U.S. incrementally increasing its defense support for those countries on Europe's eastern flank that are most vulnerable to Russia.
But some countries will be watching to see if the Pentagon pulls out of joint NATO exercises as a gauge of whether the world order is changing or not.
Following huge criticism that greeted President Donald Trump's comment taking side with Russia against U.S. intelligence report, the U.S. president has accepted his error and acknowledged that U.S. intelligence community assessment that Russia interfered in the 2016 election was right.
A missed word.
The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why I wouldn't, or why it wouldn't be Russia.
That's the explanation the president gave just one day after saying he believed Vladimir Putin when the Russian president said Russia did not meddle in the U.S. election.
He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be.
The president's contradiction of the findings of his own intelligence agencies left Republican leadership with the task of having to warn Russia not to do it again.
I think the Russians need to know that there are a lot of us who fully understand what happened in 2016, and it really better not happen again in 2018.
Leaving open the possibility of further sanctions.
I understand the desire and the need to have good relations. That's perfectly reasonable, but Russia is a menacing government that does not share our interests and it does not share our values.
And while leadership did not openly criticize Trump, some Republicans were frustrated by the worldwide impact of his comments.
It undermines our moral authority. It's a real gut punch to our sovereignty.
A view shared across the aisle.
As we all know, Putin is a ruthless leader who seeks to tear down our alliances, undermine Western unity, and destroy democracy. With the eyes of the world on them, it's plain that the President of the United States is now Putin's willing accomplice.
But some Republicans say proof of Russian election meddling doesn't necessarily implicate the president.
That's what I think has got the president so spun up, is because he feels like this is an attack on him personally. And I wish we could separate those two.
With a 90% approval rating among Republicans, Trump's popularity is bound to give pause to lawmakers from his party, some facing tough midterm re-election races. In terms of the next steps Democrats are calling for.
Now is the time for Congress and the Republicans that lead it to act. That means protecting our democracy by passing legislation to secure that Mueller's investigation against an attack by President Trump can continue. That means passing legislation to secure our election infrastructure against another cyber attack.
For now, it appears Republicans will bring Secretary of State Mike Pompeo up to Capitol Hill as early as this week to field lawmakers' questions about Russian involvement in American politics.
President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Judge Brett Kavanaugh, can expect a range of tough questions when he faces a Senate confirmation hearing in the coming weeks. Kavanaugh will be pressed on a number of issues, including his conservative views and scope of presidential powers.
Tonight, it is my honor and privilege to announce that I will nominate Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court.
When he was nominated by President Trump, Judge Kavanaugh pledged to bring an independent mindset to the Supreme Court.
I believe that an independent judiciary is the crown jewel of our constitutional republic. If confirmed by the Senate, I will keep an open mind in every case, and I will always strive to preserve the Constitution of the United States and the American rule of law.
Yet Democrats have vowed to fight Kavanaugh's nomination, fearing his conservative views could swing the Supreme Court sharply to the right for a generation.
Mr. President, I am honored to have served you and the presidency for the last 5.5 years.
In particular, Democrats have expressed concern about Kavanaugh's expansive view of presidential power, which was informed by his work for President George W. Bush. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer.
Not only did Mr. Kavanaugh say that a president should not be subpoenaed, he said a president shouldn't be investigated. Mr. Kavanaugh, is the president above the law?
Kavanaugh has written that presidents should not be distracted by civil or criminal investigations. In short, Kavanaugh has a broad view on the scope of presidential power, says legal expert Jonathan Turley.
Kavanaugh's natural default position is Article 2 in presidential power. He tends to defer greatly to presidents. That can only help President Trump if an issue goes before the court. But that's his philosophy. It doesn't mean he's biased.
Kavanaugh's view worries liberal activists like Drew Courtney.
Brett Kavanaugh has a very frighteningly wide view of presidential power. And I think that's something very much in play, given the investigations that are going on right now.
Kavanaugh will no doubt be pressed on the issue during his confirmation hearing, especially in light of the ongoing Russia probe, says legal analyst Kate Shaw.
So if, for example, the president chooses not to sit for a voluntary interview and special counsel Mueller tries to subpoena the president, there's an open legal question of whether you can subpoena a sitting president, and that could end up very quickly going before the Supreme Court if there's a legal fight over it.
Kavanaugh's Republican allies say they are prepared for a range of attacks on his record, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
That kind of cheap political fear-mongering insults the intelligence of the American people. Because Americans understand the difference between a political office and a judicial office.
Kavanaugh's confirmation requires a majority vote in the Senate, where Republicans hold a narrow 51 to 49 seat margin.
This is how far we can go this week on News Roundup. Thank you for being part of the program. I am Tunde Alabi. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye. Regardless, resident status abroad, living outside the shores of one's homeland can really be challenging and sometimes very difficult. Let's be sincere, to keep pace with happenings from the host country abroad can really be difficult. Here on Dialogue in Diaspora, we give you every information, every news, every current issue you need to know on happenings outside the UK. Dialogue in Diaspora is your link between the world and the United Kingdom. It's your window to African development. Here, live on Bentvnews.